Hi, Graham Vincent, violin maker and musician. There's very, very few jobs in woodworking that aren't made easier by sharp tools. So if you can take something like an old kitchen knife and sharpen it reasonably well, and I would argue that that's fairly sharp, then life is going to be easier in the workshop. So I'm going to talk through how, the methods that I use to get an edge like that on my tools. There are a few things I need to discuss first of all, actually. First of all, is the actual science of steel. I'm going to keep this down to about a minute, this part, if I possibly can. Think of steel, iron, ferrous metals as a crystalline structure. And the smaller the crystals, the more brittle, but the harder the material. The larger the crystals, the more flexible it is. So the softer and the tougher, that is to say, the harder it is to break. I say, so tougher it is. And you have to assume that the tool maker who's made your tool has sort of weighed up the balance about how they're going to sort of harden and temper this blade, for example, to give you the best of both. So I would imagine in this blade you probably find that this part down here is probably not that hard, but is very tough. Whereas at the tip up here, it's probably been tempered so that it's a much harder and less tough material, if that makes sense. The way you can destroy that yourself very easily is by heating these things when you are sharpening them. So personally, I don't use high-speed grindstones, because with a high-speed grindstone, first of all, it's probably the most dangerous tool in the workshop, so it's best avoided. Secondly, using one of those, it's very easy to actually sort of destroy your hand tools. And if you're in a woodworking shop, unless you do a lot of metal work, really, you're best without one of those, quite frankly. Do the sharpening by hand, okay? That would be my advice. We'll talk about a few other things as we go. Secondly, the next thing I'm going to talk about before I start showing you things, and again, I'll keep this down to an absolute, the fastest I can get through it, is angles, bevels, really important. First of all, let's start with the exceptions. There are curved bevels, okay? Not so much that one, but it's not a very good example. It's slightly curved, but it's more flat than most gouges. But this has got a curved bevel. This is a double-sided curved bevel. This is a single-sided bevel. You see, there's not much on that side. It's all on that side. And they basically give you the option of guiding the tool. So that curve is useful for items where you want to cut curvy shapes. So knives, some types of knife, that is, not all types of knife, and gouges, okay? Everything else, it's sort of straight bevels, okay? Most of them with a flat on one side. This flat is really important and is fundamental to sharpening, okay? What you don't ever want to do is round this, because this means that this chisel, I can't use it as a paring chisel if the blade is rounded up, because it's not flat against the timber. And when you're honing the burr off the end, it's quite tempting, it's quite easy to do that. So we'll cover how not to do that, okay? I realise I'm jumping about topic-wise, but there's a lot of little bits of information that you need before we jump in with the actual sharpening, okay? Secondly, there are, I mean, some people, no, there are defined angles. They're 25 and 30 degrees are the most common angles. 30 degrees being the actual sharpening or honing bevel, and 30 being the 25 being the grinding one. That grinding one is for taking the bulk of the material out, and that can be done with a fairly rough stone. The honing angle or the sharpening angle at the front needs to be done on a finer stone, but because you try to keep the grinding bevel as large as possible, so there's only a little strip along the front to sharpen each time. The fact that it's a finer stone doesn't generally slow you down. Talk about slowing you down. Sorry about this. I really am trying to get through this quickly. Okay, so it's important that those angles are defined. A lot of people will sort of do stuff by hand, and you have to be very practiced at that to not end up with the angles getting steeper and steeper. You can do it, and for millennia, if you like, people were sharpening things like that, but we don't have to nowadays. And I generally would advise that you don't, in all honesty. For plain blades and chisels, I would say use a honing guide. So here we go. Let's get on and do some sharpening. I mean, with a plain blade, I was going to say, the other thing about a plain blade, one of the reasons you want to keep that angle absolutely right on a plain blade is if you make it too steep, when it's back in the body of the plane, it's not the front of the blade that strikes the timber as you're planing. It ends up with the back of the bevel being further out, further down than the actual cutting edge. So that starts to screw things up, shall we say. How do I do this? Okay. Right. Let me just move stuff around here and put it. Let's put this here. Okay. Yeah, that'll do. Right. I've spent a fortune over the years on sharpening stuff. Sharpening stones and what have you. I really have. So, if I kneel down a bit, there you go. I've got. At one stage I had a whole set of Japanese water stones. I started off with the absolutely typical oil stone. I've got this beautiful sort of natural garnet stone, which is a gem, really, pun intended. But it's not what I use nowadays. I then moved over to diamond stones, and again I spent an absolute fortune on all these things. They were quite expensive when they first came out, it has to be said. Yeah, things like this diamond plate works nicely, but again, a lot of money. And it's almost embarrassing where I've ended up in terms of what I use to sharpen stuff nowadays. Really, one of the most useful things is either a piece of glass or a flat slab of stone. This is I think it's a granite tile, in fact, but it's perfectly smooth. And one or two really fairly coarse diamond files off eBay, which cost £2 or £3 when I bought them, honestly. When I think of the money I spent on those diamond stones, the fact that you can just buy, because all I use them for is the grinding angle rather than the actual sort of honing angle. So these are absolutely more than satisfactory. A honing guide, I've got a couple of them. A piece of wood with distances marked out, which makes setting up the honing guide much faster. Another piece of wood with a piece of leather stuck onto it, which is a strop, and a tube of metal polish. In fact, I got a couple of them because I I was worried that I'd run out, so I bought a second one when I saw some. Except I think I've had this particular tube for about 25 years, so you don't need much of that, it has to be said. So let's put that slightly to one side. Well, let's start by setting up the right. You're not going to be able to see my face. You're probably quite happy about that. Wet and dry paper. This is P600. This is pretty much all you need, really, to do things fairly well. This piece of timber, I don't know if you can see, I've got some lines, 1, 2 there, 1, 2 there, and it says sharpening projection, plane, chisel. And the way that these honing guides work is you put the blade in the thing, and then you measure the projection from there to there, and that gives you the right angle. So you can get a ruler out each time, or you can just mark off the distances that you want and then just present this up to that, which actually speeds things up so much. So there we are. I've got that set at the chisel, 30 degrees. Tighten that up. A little bit of water on the paper. What I tend to do is put some water underneath the paper as well, so that kind of just sticks in place. Can I just say, all of this is absolutely not the only way to do this. This is just how I do this. I'm not recommending you do it like this. I just thought you'd be interested to see how I do it. So there's no implicit guarantee for safety or anything. No implicit guarantees here at all. Basically, this is how I do it. And then, so I've got this set in here. The wheel runs on there. So basically, you just hold it down fairly gently. It feels like I'm going to only run it backwards rather than towards the edge, because it feels like I've got a couple of pieces of stuff underneath the paper. So if I go the other way, I will rip the paper up. P600 gives a beautiful finish. You can go finer than that if you want. I don't generally see the point. Then as you go, yeah. Okay. This is going to be a very good example of how to do this, actually, because this needs a bit more work than I was expecting. So that large flat there, I don't know, can you see this? The larger bevel is actually the honing angle. So this actually does need to be taken back quite a bit. So I'm going to use my diamond file. I'll set that up on the grinding angle. File, honing guide. Now, some of you might be thinking, well, that's all very well, but a plain blade is wider than that. It is, and you can actually sharpen it just by doing this, and that's what I do. These fairly coarse diamond files are so aggressive. This won't take very long at all, and you'll see why. I say you really don't need a sort of a mechanical grinder. So can you see now that the back bevel, which is the grinding bevel, is now much bigger. Let's keep going, getting there. Nearly there. That didn't take long, did it? That was really quick with this. A little bit more. So, I think you can now see that I've just left a tiny little strip on the front at the honing angle, but the bulk of it is now at the grinding angle. So that's the first part of that done. That can be put to one side. Now, this is quite an interesting thing as well. When you actually sharpen, when you're moving that backwards and forwards, the very tip, you can imagine, is microscopically thin. It's so thin that just the pressure of your hand pushing down on it is enough to actually bend the tip up. And that is how what's generally called swarf is formed. As you sharpen, you get this little ribbon of something about as thin as thinner than tin foil, just folding up along the edge. And because we're not going to be wanting to take much of this face if we don't have to, because we want to keep that flat, and obviously to take anything off the front, we have to take the same amount off all of it. The best thing you can do with that swarf that I've found, well, people do a couple of things. Let me show you both. So I can actually feel a little swarf there. So it feels like there's a little lip along the edge. So some people will take a piece of hardwood and will just push the blade against that lightly and then run it along. And that has the effect of taking the bulk of that swarf off. That's one way of doing it. Let me show you the way I tend to do. What I tend to do is pull back gently on that and then just turn it over so that the swarf is kind of turned the other way. And you can actually feel that that is no longer there. And then if you just take another move forward like that, that's now gone. So we now have an edge, a blade. Oh, I wonder if it can focus in this close. I don't know. I hope you can see that. Can you see the reflection there? You can see there's a honing angle on the front which is quite thin, and then that coarser ground bit is much wider. So that's a nice kind of setup. And if I needed to flatten the blade, and it's not a bad idea to just run it over the surface. I would just literally do that. Good, that's nice. The final step to getting a really, really beautiful blade is a little bit of the metal polish. So, like I said, this is just a piece of fine leather stuck down onto a piece of timber. I actually got a bit carried away, and I don't know if you can see that. I put the edge of the timber, edge of the leather, pardon, into a little slot, so it didn't tend to lift up. And then you just polish the edge by running away, not into the edge, because obviously that'll just cut straight immediately into the leather. And then flat on that surface just once or twice. Don't be tempted to lift up and do that, because you will be starting to create that round bevel on the front, which you don't want. And that is going to be a pretty sharp chisel. Let's try it out. What have we got? Just an old bit of softwood. Yeah, I mean, yeah, that's nice. What is nice as well is because I have a very flat back of the blade, I can actually sort of create a very flat cut by pairing with the chisel. So that's how you do it with a sheet of wet and dry paper, a flat piece of glass or a tile, a honing guide, some metal polish, a piece of wood with a bit of leather on it, and a cheap file. And that will produce one of the sharpest, I mean, as sharp a system as any. However, I have a secret weapon, which I will now show you, okay? So, I feel like I might have misled you slightly when I said I don't use grindstones, because I don't use grinding stones at all. But what I do use occasionally is, this is a sharpening wheel, and this is just a standard high-speed grinder, which is turned. I've actually took it off the base and turned it round, put it down. So Both of these rotate that way, and this is absolutely critical. This is one of the reasons why I don't have a high-speed grinder in the workshop, is because I don't want to be confused. As far as I'm concerned, all of my machines, they run so that the wheel is moving that way, and a high-speed grindstone obviously moves the other way. So having both side by side in the workshop could be a little bit disconcerting. I use the black sort of cutting compound on this one. It's a cloth wheel. This one is just a piece of MDF, which with that compound on it is able to produce absolute lethal razor sharp sort of edges. This is more of a polishing compound cloth wheel, and then this is just a clean, well, nominally clean wheel. So let me put this somewhere where we can see what's going on. This is what I find, I can't do this without the thing falling over. Oh, it's looking positive. There we go. Yep. Because I've got this pretty sharp already, what I'll do is on that one, I'll just do that like so. Then on this one, I'll do the same, and then I'll just do the face of it, but I won't do it like that. I'll just bring it like so. So here we go. Wear glasses. And that's pretty much it. Oops, got drain running the wrong way. I should have checked that, shouldn't I? I didn't realise it was such a... And you end up with an edge which is sharp. I mean properly sharp. And like I say, there are very few types of woodwork which isn't made easier if you can make an edge that sharp. You don't have to push as hard on your tools. They're more controllable. They're more controllable in use. I would say when you are using tools that are basically razor sharp, which is what these are, that you've got to be assiduous in making sure that you don't put your hands in front of them, because you know, I mean, for an old kitchen knife, that is absolutely lethal now. Yeah, you wouldn't want to cut yourself with that one. Anyway, that's how I do it. I hope this has been useful. Back with some more rambling and explanation about what I do. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe. Yeah, see you online. Cheers, folks. Look after yourselves. Bye.